Republican or Democrat. We voted independent because we thought John Anderson had a better answer.
Okay.
And so we're just now getting our political chops, I
Yeah.
guess.
Right, and I do
We
remember.
were adults with an income and putting...
Well, and then the Iran crisis.
Oh, and during...
when Jimmy Carter sent in troops to evacuate.
That was
that
went very bad.
Yes, and that really was I remember it being a much bigger issue. Right.
People were really upset about that. You know, again, we're watching this on the television, like we watched the Vietnam War. Now we're watching Americans, you know, trapped in Iran. They've been there for I don't know how many 100 days now. It was things weren't right in the world, and they blamed Jimmy Carter for this. And he, to the extent that he was the president during the time that they made this rescue attempt of them, and it failed. You know, his presidency suffered that, and that laid the groundwork for Ronald Reagan to come in. So, gosh, Ronald Reagan was influential in other ways. So,
well, yes, you know, the whole Russia thing and the Berlin Wall, and
we were teaching overseas during this time.
Oh yeah.
So we had gone first to Saudi Arabia to teach in the capital city of Riyadh in an international school there, and so our view of the world was actually through AFARTS, they called it, television. It was military television station that had actually a live feed, and so
I would say things were filtered.
Yeah.
They were more for the teacher compound that had all their news came via videotapes that the superintendent could control. This was a big deal because this was all building up to the Gulf War. That's at the end of 91. Anyway, remember we were actually traveling in Europe. We were flying back to the United States, and we'd flown into London, and we'd heard about the Pan Am downing of Pan Am 103. I think that's the number, right? And Muammar Gaddafi was behind that, Libyan leader, and here we are flying in and out of Heathrow Airport, and we're wondering, what's about our own safety in regard to some of that, and what's going on? Why is this kind of stuff happening?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a rude awakening that this kind of terrorism was coming to us, as opposed to us going to countries where that was happening.
Let's see. I remember when we were leaving. Well, I'm trying to stay in the 80s if I can.
Yeah.
So
This
we had built our, to go back to the 1979 and 80, we had just taken the money that we had left after that we had lost in the gold and silver venture, and we bought 2.5 acres out in the woods up in Puget Sound area of Washington, and we built our little house out in the woods. We were going to live the Mother Earth news, back to the simple things in life.
and like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and we wound up living. We built a house for $6,000. I built it with her brother.
And
that was the first thing we'd ever done.
That was septic, electricity.
That was everything. It was
except for we had a small land.
It was 1,000 square foot cabin, basically, is what it was, out in the woods.
We heated by wood.
We had a wood stove. We heated by wood, right? And she went to. I didn't get the teaching job that I thought I was going to get, which is a whole other story, not relevant to your research. But I was unemployed our first year, but we owned our house outright. We didn't owe any money.
We had a
Imagine
land
that,
payment.
somebody.
Yeah.
Well, we had we bought 2.5 acres for less than $15,000. Anyway, and we paid that off over a course of 4 years. But we started on her bank salary. She was a teller at the local bank, bringing home $450 a month. That's what we lived on.
Mm.
That was pretty thin.
Yeah.
Well,
living.
again, if you're looking at the times and thinking more as these time periods, there weren't the kind of demands on your money that there is.
There was no
No.
on our generation then. There wasn't the pressure to have nice things
Mhm.
necessarily. There were people that did that. They had the income to do that, but we were doing this on a teacher's salary, and we had a brand new baby that we were taking
Yes.
care of, and we just built our house, and so it was a very very simplistic life that we led.
Mhm.
I substitute taught that year and coached track, and she worked at the bank all that year, and we did okay.
Mhm.
And then I got a teaching job at another school district outside of our area.
I'm not sure whether you want our reaction to more world events.
Probably a little more of that. I think the flavor of the times that I'm trying to capture with this is it was entirely different in
Mhm.
terms of what people. It was it was fashionable. Where you wear holey jeans now,
Oh yeah.
that's a throwback to that kind of time.
Yeah.
But that's fashion.
Mhm.
We didn't.
Yeah.
We wore those clothes because that's what we had.
Mhm.
You know, and it wasn't because we wouldn't have liked to have knees in our jeans.
You're making it sound a little
Well,
bit
yeah, I'm just.
No. It's,
desperate. It wasn't desperate. It was just that as a whole, our generation, I think, was happier
Mhm.
with
Less.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Used cars, used truck,
Mhm.
new house. It was a new house, but very very basic,
Yeah.
very simple. And then over the years, we've added on to it and built it, and we did
but
fine.
more about world events. I remembered that the year that Amy was born, which was in 1982, that in her baby book it was, write down the events and things so that, memorable. And what I do remember writing is that the, I think Paul McCartney song, Ebony and Ivory,
yeah.
was real popular at that time.
Then there was the Mount St. Helens Blue, and that was right
Oh, yes.
very close to where we
Yeah.
were living at the time. We didn't have the ashfall that people that lived further south from us had. But
Yes. Well, we were actually
north.
north,
Yeah,
right?
north of it, yeah.
But our my mom and family, they had the ash, and that was a really big event.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy to look at a mountain that I used to look at, and we had driven by it many times, and now the top third of it is completely gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so we're reminded of how
Mother-
small we are
Mhm.
in Mother Nature's world, and
Yeah.
and the things that can
Yeah.
happen and change all of that.
I don't remember being overly worried about a lot of the events. The airplane bombing, that one bothered me because we were doing more traveling then, and there was always that risk. But I would say that, like I mentioned earlier, that it always seemed like all of these wars and demonstrations and stuff were always somewhere else. They didn't, I don't think, affect you
Yeah.
and I as closely.
The Gulf War in Saudi Arabia in '91 did.
Yes.
We were there, and people were very concerned about us, and we were very concerned about us too. But I remember though that the view of everything else in the world is from U.S. news seems to be exaggerated about how awful it is here or how awful it is there. And we're not talking war necessarily, just
Yeah.
the way life is in these different parts of the world. And we didn't find it that way at all. And one of the safest places we ever felt was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Well,
Where they-
until the Gulf War.
Yeah.
Because
yeah,
there
right.
were
Totally.
Scud missiles coming down, and we were woken up at night out of our beds with air raid sirens and
Hiding our children in the stairwell where there was
Yes.
superstructure of the
and the threat
apartment.
of drinking the swimming pool water. And I
Yeah.
mean that affected us
Yeah.
a lot more.
It would,
than-
all of this, I guess, and try to keep it close to the range of 70s and 80s that you're talking about. That was what was waiting for us at the end.
Yeah.
And I guess that we had been through, raised on the Vietnam War, you might say, and the protest area that through that and what followed, and then you've got the oil embargo. When we built our house, we left Roseburg, Oregon, and we had bought property in the Puget Sound area, this 2.5 acres, and I got two 50-gallon drums, empty drums that I could fill with gasoline, so that while I was building the house, I would have gas, because they were rationing it. You could only get it every other day.
Yes.
That was the when OPEC
Oh,
oil
yeah.
embargo, and you've heard about that. So the Middle East is factored into our lives, and who would have
Yeah.
thought that we would have chosen to gone there? What? How many
few
years?
sh- few short years after
years
that,
later,
but,
less than 10 years later, and we're going to the Middle East to teach and,
Yeah.
and raise our children and fly all over and enjoy a great
Again.
lifestyle.
more on events that were happening.
But there was, yeah.
But he is right
No,
about
yeah.
the oil embargo.
Yeah.
That did affect a lot of people's and the travel.
Sure.
However, I don't remember it being as far.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, it was just a different mindset as far as quality of living, I guess. As I was saying, it was more back to the earth, grow your own food.
This was a popular
Yeah.
movement at that time.
Sewing your own clothes.
It was renouncing all of the values of the 50s. Our parents' generation, we were the children of the boom.
The baby boom.
baby
Yeah.
boom, yeah, and we were baby boomers, and so that was the generation that brought us into the world. Well, then our generation renounced all of that because it was too materialistic, and so.
Hence, we invested in gold and silver
Yeah.
because we were so non-materialistic. But there was the sense that there was going to be like another depression coming,
Yeah.
and that whoever had the solid coins or
real money.
real money, that they were going to be able to survive
Because-
this, and that the other people would be selling their places for nothing, and
Yeah.
so there was a sense of I won't say doom and gloom, but that you would be prepared.
Her brother gave me a book called "How You Can Profit from a Monetary Crisis." Really light reading, So we were looking, and he was very earnest in his.
I think you'd call them preppers today,
Yeah.
wouldn't you?
What? Prepper.
Yeah, where you put in your bomb shelter and your food for
Oh yeah, like ready for anything.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're called survivalists.
Well, that's basically the
Yeah,
same thing.
that's, you dig your bomb shelter, right?
Yeah.
You stock it up, and you get lots of guns.
Mhm.
You're gonna need a lot of guns.
That was not us, though.
No, we weren't into that at all. But there was this idea that okay, they're taking the gold off or the dollar off of the gold standard, so the money's not going to be worth anything, and we got greedy people that are in charge. You know, corporate America's going to run off with all of our money, and so we were getting back to simpler times.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what drove us during the
And
70s and early 80s.
this would have been like 1974, 75, because
Yeah,
we both graduated in 1970.
Okay.
yeah.
And getting back to the Vietnam War, it was more, at least for me, if I remember, it was still something that our older brothers and sisters were dealing with as opposed to us.
Yeah.
Well, it's when we were younger, right? We grew up with that, and when it came time to my draft number became really important, you know, and I had a high enough draft number, and I had a student deferment, so I was able to go to college and wasn't going to be called up unless they were going to have a bigger draft call.
One thing that we were talking about this the other evening is that the news, every night when you watched the news, you would get the Vietnam War. I mean,
It was the,
Yeah.
dinner time war.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you're watching, you know, soldiers getting
oh well,
shot up in the jungles of Vietnam,
Mhm.
and it was a very depressing time period for America.
which is interesting in contrast because we had the, I would say, I guess, misfortune of being in Saudi Arabia when the Gulf War broke out.
Oh yeah.
That was in 1991, the Gulf War.
Okay,
We went in '88.
Mhm.
well, I guess that's why it is, but the way that was portrayed on television was totally different than the news that we were getting about the Vietnam War.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, the technology all changed. It was an entirely different kind of and regard for our military role.
Right, and of course the Vietnam War was getting a lot of protests, and there was a lot of discontent, and I noticed that you had a
Mhm.
Kent.
Oh yeah, the shooting.
and-
Yeah.
Neil Young had a very popular song with Crosby, Stills, and Nash was a group
Yeah.
that sang
Ohio.
Ohio, and that was the 4 students that were shot dead.
Oh yeah.
At Kent University.
Mhm.
It was just
And I think
A
that
lot
was
of
shocking because
Yeah.
there had been protests, but I don't think that anybody really envisioned guns being brought
Yeah,
out
like-
and
Mhm.
that the National Guard would actually shoot at college students who were unarmed, you know.
Yeah.
But it was a stressful situation.
Mhm.
And they weren't prepared for it. They weren't trained for confronting anything like. Nobody'd seen anything like that
Mhm.
in the streets of America before.
Yeah.
So that was a very sobering time too. I remember when I went to colleges before we got together in '72. The college had a big avenue that went through the middle of campus. It was not cars, but just
Mhm.
walkway. And I remember they were burning Nixon in effigy because
Oh,
he was
yeah.
the president at the time, and he was not ending the war.
Mhm.
And that was a big deal. And that's about as close politically as I got to it. I wasn't a
Yeah.
protester. I was raised a Republican, as I alluded to earlier. We're talking about how
Mhm.
I said Nixon wouldn't do anything
Yeah.
that dumb to keep tapes, and she was telling me, well, looks like he did.
because I was raised more
Democratic.
democratic,
Mhm.
and that I had an older brother, as we were talking about earlier, that was 7 years older than I was. So he was much more involved in that kind of
Mhm.
culture.
Yeah.
Uh, And he had friends that were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, so it affected him a little bit, I think, more.
Sure.
I just kind of remember it skimming through that whole time period, and I can't remember the end of the Vietnam War. I don't have any.
Yeah. I remember the airlift out of Hanoi.
Oh,
They
yes.
broadcast that, and that was horrific. You know, the way that the circumstances. Not too much
off
unlike the
the top of the buildings.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I do
Right.
remember the news. But there again, it was information that was coming from the news stations.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's maybe try a different topic here.
My name's Brandy. I'm Brenna's mom, and I was born in 1982.
Okay, can you please tell me what you remember about MTV in the 1990s?
I liked watching MTV, especially during the summers. They had TRL and Singled Out, the news with Kurt Loder, and lots of music videos.
Okay, do you remember anything about Bill Clinton's election?
I was young. I do remember he ran against Bob Dole. He was from Kansas. I'm from Missouri. We had a mock election. I think I was in the 4th grade, and the Republicans won in Southwest Missouri.
Okay, so another major event was O.J. Simpson's trial. Do you remember anything about that?
I remember, I believe I was at home with our babysitter, and it came over all the channels. And I do remember watching the white Bronco being chased down the interstate in California.
Okay, now we're gonna move on to the 2000s. So that was your first time voting, right?
It was. I remember, I think it was 2000, and my mom and I went up to the courthouse, and we got our picture taken, and they put it in the local newspaper that it was my first time voting.
And who'd you vote for?
I voted for George W. Bush.
Okay, so the next event was 9/11. Can you remember anything about that?
I remember I was a freshman in college in Joplin, Missouri. I came out of classes and people started telling us to go back to our dorms, that classes were canceled for the day, and we didn't really know what was going on. So we were walking to the dorms, and our resident advisor told us to go and turn on the news, and they kept telling us at the college to go get gas, because I believe at the time gas was like 98 cents a gallon, and they kept saying that it was going to go up to like $2 a gallon. But I do remember turning the TV on and seeing what was happening, and it was really sad. And then they told they emptied the dorms out, and they told us if we could go home to go home.
Okay, so moving on to 2010, since you grew up in Missouri and you were familiar with tornadoes, how did the Joplin tornado affect you, and do you remember anything about it?
I do remember we were living on Fort Bragg at the time, getting ready to go move to Colorado and stop in Missouri on the way home. And so we watched the live stream of it online, and I knew all the places. I knew where they were showing. I knew the high school that had been blown away basically, in the hospital, and had friends that lost their homes. And yeah, it was hard to watch.
Okay, so another event that happened in 2010s was the invasion of Osama bin Laden. Do you remember anything about that or anyone involved in it?
I did have a very good friend I went to high school with. He was on one of the teams that raided his home, and they did get him that night, and he had pictures of them in these mansions basically. He did end up losing both of his legs because of that night, but yeah, I do remember that.
Okay, the last event, I'm going to ask you about is the 2016 election. What do you remember about that?
I don't remember too much. I am a Republican, so I wasn't for Obama, but
2016 was him and Hillary, right?
oh, it wasn't Obama.
It's okay, I can edit it.
Okay. I was not for Hillary Clinton. Are you sure?
Yeah,
Okay.
because 2020 was Biden and him when he was running for his second term.
Okay, yeah. I was not a Hillary Clinton fan. Did not vote for her. Did vote for Donald Trump, not necessarily because of Donald Trump, but glad it wasn't Hillary Clinton.
Okay, thank you so much.